Commission is called to order. Quorum is present. Commissioners Pont, Clifford, Hicks, Kimmerly, Sullivan, and non-voting member Dick Friege. Next on the agenda is the approval of minutes from the June 26th meeting. Commissioners have reviewed the minutes. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
So moved by Commissioner Sullivan. And may I hear a second? And Commissioner Hicks. Any discussion, gentlemen? Hearing none. All in favor of approval of the minutes by show of hands? Unanimous. Thank you. Next on the agenda is approval of claims and purchase orders for payment. Today we have 3 vouchers for approval totaling $45,292.41. Mr. Starnes, could you comment on the transactions resulting in these vouchers?
I can briefly. I don't have a lot to say, as I think you'll find that most of these claims are things that we normally see month to month, including Hanson Professional Services, which is, of course, related to preliminary engineering for Franklin Road project. Let's see, I don't know that we have any for BCA this time around under our EPA grant, but then there are invoices for my services. I think we're catching up a little bit. Those were approved just through January, so this represents 3 months catching up for the monthly retainer amount, and then there's one line item for the additional matters engagement related to the Trades District and Shayland Avenue property disposition projects. And I think that sums it up, so happy to answer any questions, but I think that's all we have this month.
Okay. Any questions from the commissioners? Hearing none, may I have a motion for approval of the bills? So moved by Commissioner Hicks. Do I have a second? Moved by Commissioner Kimmerly. And all those in favor by show of hands, it's unanimous. Thank you. Mr. Starnes, the staff report.
Thank you, Jerry. Yes, first, Meyer Plastics, and we have a couple of items on new business related to this project. You'll note on the agenda, of course. So not to belabor the point, we'll be talking about that project yet to come, but just by way of update, I think the parties have currently scheduled a closing for August 13th in the hope and expectation that the Redevelopment Commission approves resolutions 6 and 7 this evening. That would get us outside of the 30-day remonstrance period following approval of the bond ordinance by the council and approvals by the Economic Development Commission. That would be a closing on bonds, real estate, private financing for Meyer, and execution of the remediation agreement all at once on August 13th. And then I think a groundbreaking is being discussed following very soon thereafter on August 15th. Meyer is very much anxious to get things underway. Again, the agenda items in front of you this evening represent the last sort of 2 pieces of approvals prior to that deal being able to move forward to closing. So that's in progress, and I think Meyer has been grateful that we've moved things along through that process as quickly as we could, and again, looking forward to getting underway and starting site work very soon after closing. So questions about where that deal stands right now? And if not, I'll move on.
Please. We're good.
To, again, sort of our monthly discussion about the Trades District, we've now moved beyond the 30-day window under state law, after which time a redevelopment commission either rejects all proposals or does not receive any proposals for disposition of property has now expired. We continue to have interest from a mechanical and refrigeration trades company out of Hamilton County. We've also met with that company, which is Free GRSC. I think we've talked about that to some degree, that company. We've met with them in the IEDC about potential state-level incentives. Their prospective move to Lawrence would be an expansion and would incorporate a facility that they currently have in Ohio. So the state was happy to hear about that, and I anticipate meeting with them about the terms of a potential letter of intent to in the coming week that then I would present to present to the Redevelopment Commission, but perhaps individually even between now and the next meeting, but we have something to consider in official capacity next month is my hope. That would involve disposition of that property and potential incentive of a move to Lawrence for that company. So that continues to progress, and I continue to think it'd be a positive addition to the Trades District. Meanwhile, I did have a meeting just this past week with Roberts Glass, which is a fairly long time Lawrence company. They're currently located in the area that we have designated as and started to refer to as the Trades District. Their business has been positive now for the last few years, and the company is looking to maybe expand their operations here, expand their footprint a little bit. So I'll be working with them on an ongoing basis to hopefully identify a site that might work. And similarly, there is an electrical design build contractor called InDesign that's located here in Lawrence already, out on Demi Drive, that does electrical contracting services all over the country. I think they're licensed in 40 plus states. I met them through the Lawrence Chamber. They joined the chamber recently, and that was a good example of our partnership with Trace and that group in terms of making sure that we're identifying and building relationships with local businesses that may have expansion potential. Further, and I thought this was interesting, right next door to InPower's current location on Demi Drive is a training facility operated by IEC, which is the Indiana Electrical Contractors Association, that does electrical certification for electrician services. So they operate already a training facility here in Lawrence. They've got a waiting list. They turn out qualified and licensed electricians on a very regular basis, and have struck up a pretty symbiotic relationship with InPower next door. And they've actually been in negotiations or discussions about an expansion opportunity for InPower that would also potentially incorporate an expanded facility for IEC here in Lawrence as part of the Trades District. So again, in terms of accomplishing the realization of kind of the epicenter of skilled trades in central Indiana here in Lawrence, seeing that move and expansion and a job training workforce development component as part of that would be hugely positive. So I continue to have discussions with them about facilities planning and what type of a location might make sense. And it would be great to have them as part of the co-location there in the Trades District that could really start to change the economy along Pendleton Pike over time. So positive news there, and we'll continue to work on the implementation of that Trades District plan. Any questions about those topics? Jerry?
Just one. Of all those of the 5 that you've mentioned, do any of them have an existing relationship with Orange Township Schools, but more specifically, McKinsey?
No, not an existing relationship. I've mentioned to all of those companies that I met with, and again, I would mention, I think I left out Roberts Glass. The bulk of their employees are glazers, which is a certified skilled trade as well. They actually do custom glazing of glass, which is a very skilled profession. Does take some training, but is also I think the median wages in that area are very strong, and again, something we'd like to see grow and build pathways to. I have certainly mentioned McKinsey to all of the companies that I've met with because they do such fantastic work in Lawrence with regard to workforce development among secondary education students, and certainly including skilled trades. And they've all been intrigued by potential partnerships with McKinsey down the road as part of relocation to or expansion within Lawrence. That's been certainly a selling point and something I'm always sure to mention.
Thank you. Other questions from the commissioners? Hearing none.
Hearing none, and moving on, I put this just under staff report, but Aletha Dunstan, who's fairly recently been selected as the executive director of the Fort Harrison Reuse Authority, had asked to address the commission. We're happy to accommodate that. I've gotten to know Aletha fairly well over the last few months, and we've talked about working together jointly on several things, including, as we discussed last month, potentially a comprehensive economic development plan for the city of Lawrence that would also include the Fort area as an element thereof, and make some recommendations as to how the two organizations can work more productively together and sort of co-market for the benefit of all of Lawrence. So I will gladly turn it over to Aletha.
Thank you. Hi, yes, as Cam mentioned, actually, I think next week will be my 6-month anniversary with the FHRA, so I want to thank you for having me.
Already?
Yeah, it's gone fast, actually. Again, my name's Aletha Dunstan. I come with a background in city planning. I spent about 8 years in the city of Marion, Indiana as the planning and community development director there. Then spent just under 3 years with the state working for the Office of Community and Rural Affairs, first as a community liaison in North Central Indiana, and most recently running the Community Development Block Grant Program. If you're familiar with CDBG, the grant that we would be looking at for the Economic Development Plan would have been under that purview. So I'm excited to be here. Thought I'd offer to answer any questions you may have about the direction of the FHRA or projects that are going on. Happy to provide a quick update about some of the things that are happening. I can just start there. You may have seen the work on the David Weekley homes, the residents at Lawrence Village. We have about 3 lots available in the original phases, and then we broke ground on 60 additional lots. So looking forward to welcoming 60 additional families to the fort. Still working through the details on developing 56th Street adjacent to the Yeager building that's out there. So still looking at a Hilton True hotel. And those developers are kind of in line and just waiting to pull the trigger. Still talking to the Indianapolis Public Library, which would be their second largest Indianapolis branch to the Central Library at about, I think, 25,000 square feet. Then the developer would provide a multifamily, a mixed-use office building, and then we would provide a public parking garage as part of that project. And then just north of that project, across Otis would be still slated for multifamily, anywhere from 5 to 8 acres, depending on the developer. And then adjacent to that, the property where we currently hold the farmers market and the Fridays at the Fort, we kind of call Civic Plaza. We are in line for a $200,000 grant to develop that parcel more formally with a stage and some hardscape ADA accessible areas. We should hear back in a couple of months on that. So all of that potentially could break ground at the same time and really come online right around the time that the Purple Line will also enter the fort. And if you're familiar with that route, come from 38th Street up Post. Currently we'll hang a right on Otis and then a left on Wheeler, culminate in the Ivy Tech parking lot, turn back around and head back to the Red Line. So a lot of great things could happen in that 2020, 2021 time period. The other thing we're trying to do is we've really kind of noticed a hole of just promotion of the fort in general. I think everybody kind of takes a stab at it and keeps it in their promotional materials, but we really want to take a larger role on telling the story of all the great things that are happening here at Fort Bend. For one, the 11 locally owned restaurants. We always play a quick quiz of how many you can name, but there are 11 locally owned restaurants within walking distance and on the Fort campus. And we've identified close to 30 tech companies within a half-mile radius on the Fort campus. So getting ready to meet with some folks at Tech Point with the state to make sure they're aware of that story and and get their opinion on how we can best leverage that information to the rest of the tech community, not only for attraction, but for retention, so that people know they're coming to somewhere that is really accepting of tech and kind of already has that authentic campus walkable feel. So other than that, we also launched, I talk about it in every meeting, took a much larger role in social media, not talking about what the Reuse Authority only has going on, but what's going on at the fort. So kind of launched Fort Bend IN on all social media platforms, and really are growing pretty fast. I think we added about 200 people to our Facebook just last month, and most of that's happening organically. So I think people are interested in what's going on out here, and we have a captive audience. We just have to go find them. So any other questions on specific projects, I'm happy to answer them.
I have one.
Yes.
Originally, the library was due to be opened, or at least project initiated, in 2019. The bonds are available to them in that year. And they're already approved. What's the schedule look like now?
I think you'd have to ask the library for a specific date, but I've always heard Q4 of 2019 or 2020.
So it is still, I'm just looking for the year.
Yeah, I think some of that's going to depend on what the developer works out with the library and the specific site arrangements. And we're still entering into that agreement with the developer now.
Okay.
So.
But they're still looking at the 2019 timeframe?
As far as I know.
Great.
2019 or 2020. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah.
Has a new developer
Commissioner
been
Sullivan.
selected for the, oh, sorry, I'm out of time.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I wonder if you could give us an update on the east side of Lawton Loop, and also the area, I guess I would say, sort of to the east and south of Cafe Audrey, which seems a little beat up.
So east side of the loop is at the PX Commissary Building.
Yes.
Under our control. So.
Well, there are at least three. I think there are 3 vacant buildings on the east side of Lawton Loop.
So there's the PX Commissary Building, which is under our control, and then the mod building.
Which is under your control?
Under our control. We're working through the details now of the site, the easements and vacations, so that we can create a defined parcel to turn that over to Context Landscape Architecture Firm out of Fortville.
I'm having a hard time hearing it.
Sorry, I'm losing my voice. We're going to be turning that property over to Context Landscape Architecture Firm out of Fortville as soon as we can define the parcel. So we're working through all the site work that needs to happen now to do that. Context.
And when you say turning it over, do you mean selling it?
Selling, yes. Yeah, so they'll occupy the northern half and then be leasing out the southern half of that building. And then to the south.
Like a competitive procurement, or how did that happen?
You know, I don't have all the details. It was well in the works before I started, but we're still working through those details now. I don't know that it was a highly competitive or highly desirable property in general. There's a lot of work that needs to go into that building. And the building to the south is known as the Mod Building, to my knowledge, still owned by Carl Meyer from Meyer Najum. And we're talking through what he's going to do with that building now, but I know he's in conversations with the Village of Marici. So that's, I think, public knowledge at this point. So, but I think there's only 2 vacancies left. So.
And the area just south of Otis Avenue, of Cafe Audrey, and that whole area. And that, I don't think you said anything about that. I think the parcels you were talking about are further to the east, right?
Correct. Yes. We do also control those properties. We know there's an entrance off of Otis, like a rock entrance that probably shouldn't be there, and it's kind of some rough concrete. We're trying to get quotes right now to at least address that until it can be developed in the future. But we understand it's an eyesore, and someone's going to lose a car in one of the holes over there. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
You've described my question.
Okay. Yes.
I would say I believe there was an RFP for the PX commissary. I recall seeing it when it was released, which was probably a year and a half or 2 years ago. So certainly predates Aletha, but I am familiar with that process. I think Context's proposal was selected pursuant to that RFP. Of course, the FHRA doesn't have to follow public procurement procedures under its guiding statute, but I think they did in that case. I had a question, Jerry, if that works. Yeah.
You have a question?
Yes.
Would you like to add? Go ahead, Nancy.
Well, actually, I was hoping you would talk a little bit more about the tech engagement sort of event that you had. I was scheduled to be there, but got sick and couldn't attend. I thought it was a great approach to start to identify and build relationships with companies that we would see as tech-based on the fort, and why you did it, and sort of what you heard from them, because I think it's important.
Yeah, so I want to say that was a little over a month ago. We pulled together some of the longer-standing tech companies and then a few of the newer tech companies together in an open suite we have in our basement, first to show off the space, just to see if anyone was interested, but also just to learn more about how they would tell the story about tech here at the Fort campus, if they even like the term tech campus, you know. One interesting thing we learned is, as far as attraction and retention of employees, they don't have as great of luck out here with like the first-time employee straight out of college, or even the second, but that second, third that's already kind of worked downtown or worked in Fishers and decided they don't really want to make that commute or fight for parking really finds a home here and tends to be a longer-standing employee. So we're kind of just like toying around with what is the messaging of the grown-up Fort campus here at Tech, here at Fort Bend. On top of, they did all kind of mimic the same things. They love walking to all the dining options. They would love to see a fine dining option that they could take clients to. Things we hear from multiple sources. They love the reverse commute from downtown Broad Ripple or Fishers or the Geist area. And really the thing that they'd like to see us focus on is scalability. So providing the opportunities, you know, to grow from the 500 square foot to the 1,200 to the 5,000 to the 8,000 before they're ready to build their own building. So we're starting to identify those opportunities now with some of the building owners and see where the holes might be. But we're very excited to pull that community together, because I think they identified the need that they need to start talking to each other and really celebrating what's really happening here organically. So.
Mr. Kimberly.
How's Midwest doing?
Midwest Studios?
Yeah.
I don't have an update.
Okay.
I will say I know that part of their property is part of the Arts for Lawrence Lilly Endowment application. So the ravine area and the water tower would be part of that project, if you're familiar with that. I don't know if they came to this group. But as far as I know, doing well.
Okay. Thank you.
And
It's kind of a follow-on to Commissioner Sullivan's question. There's a public hearing scheduled for the property that he was interested in on the loop.
Yes.
And that's to define, tell me what that's for.
Okay, so as you know, a lot of these parcels are very interesting from all the historical iterations. So that public hearing is to vacate a 22-foot road that was planned to go right through the middle of that parcel from north to south. It doesn't connect to any other right-of-ways or any other platted road, so it really isn't going to affect anyone else, but it's something we need to do to clean it up. Meanwhile, we'll also be doing some land transfers with the condo association to the north, as well as some land cross-access agreements, just to make sure everything functions over there, right. And that we can define a clean parcel to convey to context.
So then the condos would have a clean, if you will, entrance and exit,
Yes.
well-defined, which they really don't have now.
Yeah. Yeah, and the goal is to turn that circulation over to the city as public right-of-way. So it'll be a committed access point.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Well, I would just say to Bruce's question, because I've been involved in the Lilly Arts Grant application. Midwest has been, and I've met with Ed at Midwest several times over the last couple of years. He's sort of always threatening to move his operations. I think he remains a little frustrated by the fact that he's unable to expand in the way he would like to here on the fort, which is really kind of an artifact of the historical nature of his property and the fact that some of it is defined as open space, et cetera. It's really not anybody's direct fault. That said, he's been a pretty valuable partner in the arts grant application. He's very excited about it. Personally, I think he's lent plenty of resources from Midwest to the application effort. They designed and produced the video that was part of the initial application, 60-second video that, again, Lawrence is one of the finalists to complete a full application, one of 25, which is good, and so not an insignificant amount of time and resources by Midwest that went into that. I think their business seems healthy, and all the conversations I have with him are around the concept of expansion, which is good, but I do think he continues to talk about moving elsewhere. I don't know to what degree he's serious. And again, a lot of the frustrations are not things that the city or even the FHRA can control. So we'll see what happens, but it's been good to have him involved in the arts process. Talented individual, fascinating company, business, so.
Well, they pull an awful lot of very interesting people into the fort.
True.
I mean, their customer base is very, very interesting.
Did you have a question, Commissioner Sullivan?
Would you mind repeating the number of locally owned restaurants and tech companies? I didn't write those down, and my memory has already failed me.
To my count, 11 restaurants, in addition to, the IHOPs and Arby's and Culver's. And we're redefining the number now that we're going to present to the state, but it's solidly within 25 and 30.
Thank you.
Within the restaurants or the
Tech.
tech, 25 or 30? Thank you. 11 restaurants, right?
Locally owned restaurants.
Right, correct.
Thank you.
And that does include the Garrison, which is state-owned, but unique.
Does include the Garrison?
It does, but we consider that, a unique dining opportunity, so we're counting it.
It's not a chain.
It's not a chain.
Not a chain, that's for sure. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And again, I've spent, my whole career in community planning and development through municipalities and at the state. So if there's anything I can ever do, or if anything comes up just outside of the fort within Lawrence, I'd be happy to help at least either provide connections or give an opinion. So,
Thank you for
All right.
being here, and come back anytime.
yes, thank you all.
Thank you.
Brian, next we need to open our public hearing on the confirmatory resolution to create a new economic development area and allocation. That's for reference resolution number 6, 2018, Meyer Plastics. So we have opened that session, and Cam is on his way to retrieve the sign-up sheets for anyone wishing to speak, and it looks like we don't have anyone to speak. While he's doing that, I'd like to thank Brian Bosma and Jeb Higgins very much for being here for this hearing, in addition to all the good work that they've done on this project. Thank you very much.
Can I give just a few thoughts while you're
Please.
waiting?
Please.
Thank you. Thank you, members of the Redevelopment Commission. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Brian Bosma with Kroger, Gardis, and Regas, serving as bond counsel and counsel to the city with respect to the Meyer Plastics matter. I did want to confirm for you that Mr. Higgins delivered to me a certificate of delivery of to all underlying taxing units of the tax analysis which you've received, and also the notice of today's hearing, which we prepared. I also have proofs of publication that the notice appeared both in the Indianapolis Star and the Court and Commercial Record. So it's Jim and I were speaking. We also have with us Mr. Richard Starkey, who is the attorney for the bond counsel and attorney for Meyer Plastics. We're all happy to answer any questions that you may have, go through details. You have before you 2 items: the confirmatory resolution to consider after completing the public hearing, and then a pledge resolution pledging the TIF funds and other funds held under the trust to repayment of the loan. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Bosma? Yes, Commissioner Sullivan.
And I'm sorry, as you know, I was not able to be here in person for the last meeting. The last time I was party to an in-person discussion on this, the final terms of the remediation agreement were still being negotiated a little bit. And that's the one part of this where the commission itself has some financial exposure. And I wonder if either Mr. Bosma or Mr. Starnes could just sort of walk through. I remember generally what the concept was, but what the final details are on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, and actually that would be executed at closing as well on August 13th, and there's still been some interaction about terms. We've removed, there had been a specific scope of work attached to that mediation agreement that we've removed. I think that's the only real substantive change since the Redevelopment Commission reviewed it. I think, at least in part due to your suggestion during a meeting a couple of months ago, we've asked that the escrowed funds that are sale proceeds from Meyer to Mitchell Group, the current owner and seller of the property, be simply remitted to the Redevelopment Commission as a grant, which is something that I think is under consideration, given that the agreement itself provides that anything left in that escrowed funds would go to the RDC anyway. So it makes sense to us that it would just be granted in one lump sum and used to offset any costs that the Redevelopment Commission might have to get the site to closure in accordance with obligations under the agreement. So that is, again, under consideration. We'll have to sew that up before August 13th. I think we should have an answer on that yet this week, and I can then circulate sort of the current draft to the redevelopment commissioners to look at and review.
And the amount of the escrow is
$150,000.
And
less any expenditures toward environmental remediation or tracking since January 1.
Yes, and there has been one round of groundwater monitoring, I believe, but it will still be, I believe, $130,000 to $135,000.
And is our liability capped at $150,000, or might something happen that would cause us to have to dip into our own general funds in respect of any qualified costs?
It is not capped at that amount, so that is possible, but I think what we've done that we discussed previously is have our own environmental consultant look at the data that's been generated on the site, which is considerable over the last several years, and give us its own opinion as to cost to closure to compare with what we have from the current owner's environmental consultant. And what we saw from both of them was that the estimate was right around $90,000. So given there's some contingency in the escrowed funds, and additionally the potential ability to utilize EPA grant resources to do some investigation and monitoring on the site that could help lead to closure through IDEM. I think we felt confident that the outside number was manageable and that it was unlikely to have to pull any RDC funds. But I would say that it would be inaccurate to say that there's a cap.
If I may add one other thought, the other expenditure of RDC funds is the reimbursement to the property purchaser of a pollution liability policy that will name the city, the Redevelopment Commission, and the Economic Development Commission as additional insureds in the event there's a third-party claim as well. So that is a direct expenditure of RDC funds, but it's a wise expenditure.
And that, as I recall, was a one-time premium. And that whatever the coverage period on that policy, any occurrence after the coverage period of that policy would not be our responsibility, or something. Do I have that about right?
After a no further action letter is issued, the policy, that your responsibility to cover deductibles or responsibility at the site
Deductibles, that was the
is
issue
gone.
that I was.
And I'm not sure about there's been some discussion that Cameron has had.
It is a one-time premium for 10 years of coverage at a value of I believe, $7.5 million. Those would be the limits, subject to a $100,000 deductible or self-insured retention. That would be the responsibility of the commission if there's a claim that triggers the policy and that deductible prior to the state's issuance of a no further action letter or regulatory closure, after which the responsibility for any deductible is on Meyer itself. And given federal environmental law as the RDC's exposure to obligations to remediate the site are really limited to this contract. So they would really not endure beyond the issuance of a no further action letter. The city will never have owned or operated the property. So once those contractual obligations are discharged by virtue of receiving closure, there's not really a prospect of ongoing liability underneath that with regard to the property.
And the coverage for the insurance policy is for government-ordered remediation?
Generally, third-party claims.
Third-party claims. And the escrow covers...
Government required
I had them
yes.
backwards.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I know this is complicated stuff, and glad to have advisors who understand this area of law. But
there was some discussion at the outset for the RDC to actually own the property and lease it to Meyer. That gave several of us pause because, as Mr. Starnes has indicated, then you are subject to owner liability.
Yeah. Well, this is a good solution all around, it seems to me.
And that premium was 20,000 roughly?
The premium, the one-time premium, is, I believe it's closer to 100,000.
Oh, is it that much?
Yes. Yeah. But again, we've negotiated for that to include the city. I don't know that we honestly have again, given that the exposure under that contract is really limited to the contract itself, I don't know we have a
Insurable interest.
A real insurable interest, but the cost of defense would be maybe of some benefit if we could pick that up from the policy. And it is government side, the enforcement side is what we're taking on intentionally to get to no further action. That's kind of the cutoff for the government enforcement action. It's then what do you do with third-party claims from somebody who lives off-site or works on the site? That's what the insurance product is for.
May I just ask one last question? Maybe this isn't directly relevant to today, but more of an ongoing thing. How will we, as a commission, manage any issues that arise under the escrow? That is to say, while it does sound like we've got everything covered, there's still going to be an issue whether under the remediation agreement any particular claim is covered or not. And then you said something in response to my earlier question that led me to believe that some of the kinds of claims, and that might not be the right word, but some of the kinds of claims that might arise under the escrow might be eligible for some type of government funding. And we'd, of course, want to use that if that was available rather than what was in the escrow. And it seems to me that some body has got to be responsible going forward so that there's not a slip between the cup and the lip here and we end up paying for something that we really shouldn't have to, or end up paying for something out of the escrow for which some type of government funding might be available.
Yeah, I think here's how I foresee this going. I think the Redevelopment Commission will directly contract with an environmental engineering services firm to accomplish necessary work to get the site to closure. We actually have had BCA, which we have an existing contract with under the EPA grant, prepare what are called sampling and analysis plans for some rounds of sampling coming up, and submitted them to EPA for approval. Once approved, we'll know, to what extent we can use remaining grant resources to cover work on the site. After which point, we'll have to take stock and probably solicit a scope of work from BCA or any other environmental firm, knowing that we have $150,000 to fund environmental work on the site, have that work be performed by a contractor that the RDC selects under an engagement of professional services, to have those costs covered by the escrowed funds, or by a grant of those funds if that's deemed acceptable to the parties that we've asked for. So I see that being how the RDC goes about discharging its contractual obligation under their mediation agreement, would be entering into a contract with an environmental consulting firm to do the work to satisfy the state to get to regulatory closure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would say I collected the sign-in sheet from the back of the room, and we do not have anybody that has signed up to speak as a part of this public hearing on this matter.
Having no one wishing to speak on this matter, the public hearing is now closed, and the Redevelopment Commission will resume its normal meeting. And the next item on the agenda is the approval of Resolution number 6, 2018, the confirmatory resolution creating a new allocation for Meyer Plastics. And the commissioners have had an opportunity to review this rather lengthy document, which also serves as a history of what we've done since May 22nd of 2018.
Convenient.
Kind of nice. Do I hear a motion for approval?
I have a question.
You have a question?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Kimmer?
Just clarification, the allocation area is a 9.4 or 9.5 acres. The other 4.1 or 3, if there is development on that, then the differential TIF money goes straight to the.
So as to the entire close to 15 acres is designated as a new redevelopment area. But the allocation area is limited to the site that Meyer will develop, which is, I think 10 and a half, somewhere in there, acres along the north side.
Plus acres.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, in case this is your question, there will be no TIF generated in the lower portion until something is placed there. Yeah. However, you should be aware that the loan agreement provides that excess TIF that is generated in the northern portion, which they occupy, will actually go to pay down the note and the bonds early. We had a substantive discussion about whether that fund should come, those excess funds should come, if they occur, should come directly to the RDC, or if they should pay the note and loan earlier. It's really 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, because as soon as the note and bond are paid, then the Redevelopment Commission, well, actually the city and all underlying entities will receive all of the, let me rephrase that. Up to 25 years, the Redevelopment Commission will receive all of those funds, and then they'll pass through to the underlying entities, including the city, thereafter.
And I think if we looked at the southern portion that will not be an allocation area at this point, if it were to get developed tomorrow, any new taxes generated, real estate taxes, business personal property taxes generated there would actually go to the units, unless and until we were to create a new allocation area around that piece as well. And we've gone ahead and put that into the redevelopment area so that we could do so and save a step. But currently, if that were to be developed without creation of a new allocation area, all of those taxes would go to all the units.
Okay.
We took it out.
Did we take the whole thing out?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you're right. You're absolutely right.
Do I hear a motion for approval? Commissioner Kimmerly, is there a second? Commissioner Blunt? We have we have a motion that has been made and seconded. Is there further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, by show of hands. Unanimous. Thank you. Did I sign that already? Okay. All right. Next on the agenda is resolution number 7-2018, pledging tax increment to debt service on Meyer plastic bonds, which has been very recently mentioned. The commissioners have reviewed this resolution. Do I have a motion for approval of resolution number 7-2018?
So moved.
So moved by Commissioner Sullivan. And do I hear a second?
No second.
Commissioner Blunt. And is there any discussion? Hearing none. May I have a, by show of hands, approval for resolution number 7-2018? Unanimous. Is there any other business to come before the commission today? Hearing none, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Just want to express our appreciation to everyone who's helped with this Myers Plastic project. I think my commissioners would join me in doing that. It's great to be able to vote in favor of this, but we know that we didn't do much of the work.
That's true.
So thanks to everyone, and thanks to Meyer Plastics for having faith in our community and wanting to come out here and do business. We look forward to having them as a neighbor.
I second those comments. It's a job well done.
Yeah.
We're all nodding our heads.
Yeah.
Well said,
Yes,
well said.
Brian, Jim,
So-
Rich as well. Thank you for your work on this.
Now are we
Move we adjourn.
second? All in favor?
Aye.
We're done. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Certification of no interest.
Brian?
It's right here.